Hello again, college football fans. Welcome to part 2 of my national championship preview series, or otherwise known as me dismantling sources of confidence and dashing the hopes of the Georgia faithful going into this national championship rematch game. The first part of the series, I spoke about how, history is on the side of the Georgia Bulldogs when it comes to rematches, and I've heard some of them talk about that was a source of confidence for them. And I mentioned, a couple of examples of how what happened in those games, but I did fail to mention the Auburn Georgia rematch in 2017, which helps Georgia's case even further if you're going to look at history, because they got the revenge that year, and they got beat bad by an Auburn team, and got their revenge in the SEC championship game. So I figured I would be remiss not to mention that, but Jared Stidham and the Auburn Tigers are not Bryce Young and the Alabama Crimson Tide, and it's not the national championship game. So that's my retort to your retort, had there been one. My second point that I'd like to make, I hear a lot of this. Now, this is where being an experienced Alabama fan and intimately and with laser focus watching all the goings on in these playoff games over the years, because we're always involved and usually make it to the national championship game and usually win it. So, Alabama fans just have a lot more experience as fans seeing how this process works. I have heard some talking heads mention it too, so that's a little bit confusing, because they should be paying enough attention to know that just because Georgia looked better than Alabama in the semifinal games, I don't think that that's really an advantage. As a matter of fact, I would go the other way with that, because if you look historically through the playoff, 2014 was a bit of an outlier, because the two best teams were Alabama and Ohio State. The national championship game was in the semifinal that year, so that was a little bit of an outlier. But the next year, most Alabama coaches on that squad, and probably the players too, will tell you that the best game that Alabama played that postseason was that semifinal game against Michigan State, when they just trounced them 38-0, and probably didn't play quite as good a game, their game in the national championship game against Clemson. Luckily for us, though, Dabo hadn't quite got Clemson to the clip yet where they could take advantage. But, and then the next year, we played. That was the Jalen Hurts year, so that's a bit of an outlier too. We didn't look all that great against Washington, because we weren't all that great. I mean, Jalen just couldn't make a pass that year. If his first option was not open, he just couldn't make a read. And once he got in playing elite defenses, that was exposed. But then in 2018, Alabama really had to exert itself to beat Oklahoma. I think Nick Saban already by then knew that you don't want to, blow your whole stack against the semifinal opponent. And I think he wanted to not have to exert so much energy to beat Oklahoma, but he had to, because Oklahoma, didn't allow us to just rest and take the air out of the game in the second half. They put it on us a little bit, and we had to play a lot harder for a lot longer than Saban wanted him to in that game. 2019, obviously, we didn't participate in that, but you could see that LSU didn't really they didn't have to sweat too hard against Oklahoma that year, and then obviously Clemson and Ohio State had a war, and LSU wound up winning handily. And then by 2020, Saban really had it down, and you could tell that when we went in to play Notre Dame, we did much like we did this year against Cincinnati, and didn't flex too much, didn't open up the playbook. We just went in there, got the lead, held on to it, and got out of there with the victory. And that's exactly what we did against Cincinnati. And a lot of people are using that, and using the fact that Georgia was breathing fire and did play the best game of their season and did pull out all the stops to beat Michigan. They're using that as, a source of confidence for them going into the national championship game. And I think I just laid out pretty well why I don't believe that's the case. I believe that Georgia did play their best game that they played of the season. I believe Stetson Bennett played his best game of the season. And maybe the defense played the best game of their season as well. And the thing about it is you need your best game of the season in the national championship game. And I know that Georgia and Kirby doesn't have all the experience that Saban and Alabama does in the playoffs. So, they knew it was do or die. And like I said earlier in earlier videos, everybody got wrapped up in the whole Michigan story and got a little bit bamboozled by a paper tiger that somehow lucked its way into the playoffs. And so Georgia really didn't have to play their best game to beat Michigan, but they did. They did play their best game. And so it's going to be tough for them to match that intensity again, back-to-back weeks. I expect them to get close, but it's just really hard to play your best game back-to-back weeks. It's just been proven time and again. I mean, last year Ohio State and Clemson had their war, and Ohio State came out on top, and they played a great game and really put it on Clemson, but paid the price in their quarterback, his name escaped, just Fields, Justin Fields, and he wasn't quite as effective a quarterback in that national championship game against Alabama last year, and that really hurt them. And plus, like I said, it's hard to get that level of intensity 2 games in a row. And so Alabama had no intention of being all that intense when they beat Cincinnati. I think Saban, like I said, knew that we could go in there and play left-handed and not take any chances and not have to, breathe too hard, and we could still get out of there with a victory. So I do believe that Alabama will have more in the tank than Georgia does for that very reason. So that's the second source of confidence, and the second, little bit of hope that I hear coming out of the Georgia camp that I just don't see. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think the fact that Georgia looked better in the semifinal bodes well for Alabama in the championship game, not to mention the fact that it made Alabama the underdog again, which, I don't really have to explain at this point why that's a good thing for us. But anyway, there's the second video in my national championship game preview series, and we'll have more coming out leading up to the big day. Thanks.